to do this? You left BCG and went into this full time.
They were very kind to say, okay, hey, take a leave of absence and
Okay.
take 6 months, and if you want to come back, we'll be happy to have you back. And I mean but I decided at that point in time that I wanted to do something a little bit faster paced, uh, which was ironic because what I chose to do after that was to go to Himachal and spend a year in the village farming, which is definitely not faster paced. But I think the intent there was really, how do you I had this, it had really impacted me very deeply growing up. And, my parents were like, hey, this, farming is not going to be a place to make a living, right? At least at the scale that, they were farming, it was
Right.
definitely not. I remember my first salary out of college, right? I mean, I made more money that year than people that, my parents had probably made in the last 5 years. And that struck me as, that's just not right. Right. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
Hey Ashish, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. Really looking forward to the chat.
thank you. Thank you, Aviral and Mazin, for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to, share a little bit about myself.
Yeah, so maybe we can start with before college and college. Any seeds that were planted in your mind of entrepreneurship, if they were, if not, any key decisions you made,
Lost you for a second.
any key decisions that brought you to this path as well during before college, and going forward.
So I think let me maybe start at the very beginning, right? And I think looking back, you can probably draw a lot of straight lines and say this informed that and all that. But I definitely didn't sort of play out in that way in my mind, at least. I was born in Simla. My parents are apple farmers in upper Himachal. In fact, the place where the first commercial apple tree was planted in India, close to about 100 years ago, is about 500 meters from where my mother grew up, right? So heart of the apple growing belt. Spent the first year and a half in village school. My mother likes to tell how I rebelled and effectively tried to drop out of nursery class in village because I wanted to do something different. And thankfully, my parents said, okay, let's move to the city. It may be a good place to provide at least opportunities to actually have a different life, other than farming. And so I grew up in Chandigarh. Spent till the age of 18 in Chandigarh. Uh, went to IIT Delhi. You've talked about the typical path. Land up in IIT Delhi. Interesting, path to IIT Delhi as well. I think Chandigarh was very interesting in that sense that you didn't really need to have a lot of money to actually live an interesting life, right? I think there was a lot of opportunities. Small city, so I learned horse riding. I did a whole bunch of martial arts, and parents didn't have a lot of money, but it afforded small city with a lot of infrastructure for leading a pretty interesting life in that sense, right? And I think learned French when I was 14. Spent about 2 years learning French. And that was actually a very pivotal moment in my life. I mean, I think when I was 16, during the 1998 World Cup in France, France organized this World Cup related competition all across the world, where it was a French speaking competition where you could participate. And I was one of the 5 winners from India. It was a global competition. First time I ever saw went anywhere outside this country was to go and see the World Cup. The French government organized this 15-day trip.
Amazing.
Went and saw a bunch of matches. Met people from 150 countries around the world. I mean, mind-blowing experience. Changed the entire trajectory of my life. And I think that when I came back, I was like, okay, I want to do something different with my life. I didn't really have a very big clue about what that was, but I said, I want to do something that exposes me a little bit to the world, because this has been a pretty transformational experience. I mean, it's 15 days, but when you're 16 years old, I mean, your life, my horizons completely opened up. And I came back, and I was in this little bit of a haze for the next 2-3 months, saying, what do I do? But I looked around, and all my friends were, studying for, IIT, and I said, okay, this seems like what smart people do, and I'd done okay in school, so I decided to do that. That year was really interesting. I mean, everybody was, I think, the year 2000, I remember, big millennium, change in sort of the world. Everybody was talking about how Y2K will, destroy the world. And I was sitting there preparing, for the JE entrance on 2nd of January, right? But yeah, that changed my life here. I mean, I think ended up at IIT Delhi. A lot of people from who I grew up with in Chandigarh ended up there at the same time. So it was a great new experience, but also around a lot of people that I'd grown up with. And then from there, spent 5 years at IIT. I'm happy to, I don't know how you guys want to do this. Do you want me to just continue going all the way
Yeah,
through,
yeah,
or
no, no, keep,
how?
keep. We're
Got it.
fascinating
I,
journey.
I, I think IIT was again, very, very, again, interesting point. I remember that year, uh, I landed up, and in the first year of college, I got every single grade that there was possible to get, like from an A to an E, and E is
The
a, E
full
is a, E is a
spectrum.
failing grade, right? So I was like, full spectrum, and when I got the E, it shakes your confidence, right? I mean, you're like, okay, you've done well throughout life, and suddenly you're here, and suddenly you're like, oh crap, you're around a lot of very smart people, and you have to work hard.
Yeah.
And that was a big wake up call, I think, for me. And next, I was in the 5-year dual degree at IIT Delhi. I was studying biochemical engineering, and so really decided, okay, here's I really need to sort of demonstrate to myself and to other people that I can do something substantial. And that started off, I guess, a very interesting remaining 4 years in at IIT. Played a lot of sports, played literally everything, debated, quizzed, did dramatics. I think the beauty of IIT Delhi at that time was, and one of the reasons why I chose to go to IIT Delhi over other places, other limited choices that I had during counseling, was this was a place where I felt like I would also be able to do a lot of other co-curricular activities. And so I think that played out really well, and I had a blast, made a lot of great friends. I think learned just the power of really working really hard, and not really banking on being smart. Yeah, I mean, I think that was a good wake up call early on in life. Uh,
No,
was
that,
very, very interested at one point in time, I think, in a master's and a PhD in biochemical engineering. I was doing a lot of work in wastewater treatment, and I felt like growing up, I spent every summer when I was growing up on the farm in Himachal. So deep exposure to food and agriculture, rural life. 2.5, 3 months a year was spent in the village, and when you're there, you kind of have to participate in the whole process of harvesting, etc. So grew up around that. Saw a lot of the challenges that people in rural areas face, and saw a lot of the challenges around no young person wanted to be a farmer. I mean, that's unfortunately true even today, right? I mean, most people there's a romantic notion that maybe people like us have, oh, I'll go get a plot of land and work on it. But if you have to live off that living, it's a hard life. And I think that was one big lesson that I took away from that, which was my parents were um, very clear early on that you have to have a plan that does not necessarily involve farming, because it's
okay.
going to be a tough life. And I think for me that really impacted me, because I think a lot of my adult life has really been about is there a way to change that, right? Is there a way to make farming a meaningful, viable, financially viable option that people have in rural India, because there's 600 million of our countrymen and
Yeah.
women working in that, and that's a
It's an
large number
agricultural
of people.
economy at the end of the day.
And it's a pretty it's only about 15 to 18% of GDP, but it is nearly half the population of our country.
Right.
And I think
Right.
if
Yeah.
as a country we're going to truly realize this demographic dividend that we keep talking about, I think we're going to have to find meaningful ways to actually provide large scale employment for people who are currently involved in farming. And I think for me that has been something that I have uh, really thought a lot about for pretty much my entire adult life. And I think what Jumbotail today is a manifestation of some of that thinking along the way, and we'll get to that maybe later on in this conversation.
Yeah.
But I think I realized in college that while I loved the academic parts of wastewater treatment, water, and again those were also those interests were also related to water plays a very important life in agriculture. It plays a very important role in
Yeah.
in urban making urban settlements good places to live in. And so I almost I spent a summer running around Denmark, basically going from one wastewater treatment plant to another, collecting samples of sewage to basically analyze, right? And it probably wasn't the most, it wasn't the coolest, way of spending a summer. But I was in Europe. I was,
It was a different summer, right?
doing interesting
Denmark,
things,
I mean,
and it was my way to get to seeing a little bit more of the world, and I loved it. And I came back very convinced that I would apply for a PhD and really do all spend my life working in wastewater treatment and water, and that interest has not really gone away. I mean, I continue to sort of look for ways to do that in an entrepreneurial way. And someday, maybe after Jumbotail, there's another startup in me. My wife's going to kill me when she hears this, but maybe there's another one in me after this, right? And that definitely will be related to that. But I think one realization after working, 2 summers in labs was I felt like the solutions to many of these things lay in the business world, and I had no business context. I mean, I didn't know anything about business. Everybody in the family was pretty much, almost everybody was farming, and I said, okay, I need to go to a place where I can, learn, how businesses are built, and maybe get a fast track education in that.
Okay.
So got lucky in terms of when I in my final year, BCG was decided that they wanted to hire people out of undergraduate institutions in India, as one of 5 people that they hired in India in 2005. So went straight from IIT Delhi to BCG. Spent about 4 years at BCG, about 2.5 years in India, year and a half in Chicago.
Nice.
Then went to business school, came back to BCG, spent a total of about 6 years at BCG, both in India and the US. Again, right, as Aviral was saying, very, very, many people, including some people on your podcast. I was telling you earlier, right? I mean, I heard Raghu's podcast. Raghu's a senior mind from IIT Delhi, and I have a lot of respect for him. And so this consulting and going then trying to do something entrepreneurial sounds very typical. But I did a lot of very different things in my mind, right? I decided very early on that being partner and living a sort of a life of a consultant long term was probably not what I wanted, and therefore I said, okay, let me choose to work on projects or cases that the single criteria I sort of said I'll employ was is this going to be an interesting story someday, right? And if it's going to be an interesting story someday, I want to do it. And as a result of that, I ended up doing this. I ended up doing a very eclectic mix of things, right? I worked on what eventually became the blueprint, or at least an input into the blueprint for the World Test Cricket Championship. I worked on in a tuna processing plant in Mauritius. Was one of the few people involved in actually starting BCG India's social impact practice, where we worked extensively with government. In fact, nearly 3 years out of my 6 years at BCG were spent working on the public distribution system, so which is the system, Indian government system of where they hand out ration cards to about 800 million people in the country, and the Food Corporation of India procures wheat, rice from farmers and then transports it over thousands of kilometers. There's about 800 million people. Government spends about $20 billion every year on it. And in 2005, the government had come out with a study which said that 55% of the food actually doesn't find its way to the right beneficiaries. And I said, this is. There happened to be a project. BCG used to do a lot of work with the World Food Program, and there happened to be a project that they were contemplating doing. And I basically chased after this partner in Rome for I think 3 months before he said, okay, let's find a way for you to be on this. And what it was supposed to be a 3-month project turned into a year and a half of running around all over rural India. I have these photos of me wearing a gamcha, sitting in a truck in rural MP, really sitting in these vehicles and seeing where this material is going, how it's going to be handed out, what are the challenges, how are the where does the leakage happen. And it gave me a deep appreciation and a fascination for all things supply chain, all things food, all things in many ways retail as well, right? And I think, again, if I look back now, a lot of those things are dots that can connect towards sort of what I'm doing at Jumbotail. But back then it was more about this is an incredible way of me learning about how this country operates. Large percentages of our population are food insecure. right?
And it was linked back to your passion about helping
And again, yeah, I mean, I like to say
the
food's in
team.
my blood,
Yeah,
but it also became something that became an intellectual, and a sort of a professional passion of mine. And it sort of captures a lot of the things that I like, right? I mean, large scale technology, being at the cutting edge, also, but not being afraid to get your hands dirty, right? I mean, getting working on operations, working at large scale, working in chaotic environments which don't necessarily welcome technology. And that's been another thread, I think, in life that I have gravitated towards, which is large problems with which involve very large numbers of people, lots of different stakeholders, and where technology can play a role.
I think that's where that like jump from consulting to having that kind of exposure. Perhaps there's some parallels there, but walk us through that transition. You spent a while at BCG, but you knew that you this wasn't what you wanted to do long term. How did you make that switch, take the plunge?
Very very serendipitous path, yeah. I mean, again, I don't think that it was ever. I've never really operated in that manner. I think even if I look at sort of. I spent 6 months right after BCG working on Nandan Nilekani's election campaign for the Lok
Okay,
Sabha in 2014,
wow,
and that again came out from one conversation where a lot of the work that I was doing with BCG, and I mean, it was incredible that they let me do this for such a long time, because it didn't necessarily make them money, but I loved the opportunities that it gave me. But I'd gotten to know Nandan a little bit better because we were using. I mean, my first instance working with the public distribution system was pre-Aadhaar, and I realized how big these problems were
yeah,
around
yeah,
identity, etc., etc. And we enrolled 1 million people actually in a multimodal biometric program in Odisha in 2006 and 7. And I just hats off to what our country's been able to do with Aadhaar, where
incredible.
looking back, I mean, it's a miracle that this happened, right? And I'd gotten to know Nandan a little bit during that time, because this next version of me working on the public distribution system and direct benefits transfer was in implementing Aadhaar in that context. And so when I heard he was running for election, I said, okay, I got to find a way to be part of that. And I spoke to some people on his campaign. They were very gracious enough to say, hey, come in, and uh, you're welcome to actually participate. And so again, transformational period of about 4 5 months, 6 months working on the campaign gave me a really deep appreciation for how democracy in this country works. And I walked away with just a lot of learning around how large groups of people think, how technology can really play a very important role.
And so you
But
left BCG
after,
to do this. You left BCG and went into this full time.
they were very kind to say, okay, hey, take a leave of absence, and
Okay,
take 6 months, and if you want to come back, we'll be happy to have you back. And I mean, it's the only company that I outside of Jumbotail that I've ever worked at, and I owe a ton of gratitude to they let me do a lot of things that I think today people would find how did
not
you
the
manage to do
typical
that. And
consulting experience, like you said,
people
right?
were very 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 encouraging and nice. I mean, they just said come back in 6 months if you want. But I decided at that point in time that I wanted to do something a little bit faster paced, uh, which was ironic, because what I chose to do after that was to go to Himachal and spend a year in the village farming, which is definitely not faster paced.
Uh,
But I think the intent there was really, how do you I'd had this, it had really impacted me very deeply growing up. And, my parents were like, hey, this, farming is not going to be a place to make a living, right? At least at the scale that, they were farming, it was
right.
definitely not. I remember my first salary out of college, right? I mean, I made more money that year than people that, my parents had probably made in the last 5 years. And that struck me as, that's just not right, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
there has to be a better way of doing that. And so I spent a year in Himachal with the intent of saying, okay, let's take everything that people say will help farmers make more money. It's obviously something the government of India has always been talking about for a long period of time. How
Yeah.
do you get farmers to increase incomes, etc. And so I tried out a variety of different things. I said, let me try like an MVP type of approach to say, okay, what will work. And so I experimented with what it would take to set up a chain of uh, you know cold storage facilities. So if you look at my area in Himachal, it's
Mhm.
apple, cherries, plums, pears, apricots, temperate fruit that need comes once a year, and then you sort of you
Got
make
it.
make whatever money. um,
So it's the
Hello.
whole thinking about the whole distribution from getting it from
Correct.
there to the stores. And
I mean, a lot of the work that's been done in the country. If you look back at the Green Revolution, if you look at things that people have done, it largely has been focused around how do you increase productivity, how do you make the same plot of land more productive.
Give more output.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
and my original thought process was around that as well, right? I mean, can you bring in imported varieties? Can you find ways where especially with climate change, can you make agriculture more resilient? And again, I truly believe those are important problems that are only going to become more and more pivotal. But I think in my process of sort of doing these MVPs in across 2014, 2015, I came to the realization that be it, let's say, cold storage, or be it food processing, make a lot of jams, jellies, squashes, things like that, or even direct to consumer selling, right? There's a lot of intermediaries between
Yeah.
farmers and end consumers,
Yeah.
and so the price we pay, not a lot of it actually finds its way back, right? And so the idea was, how do you sort of solve for any of those problems? And that's when I started, again, happenstance. I'm a big believer in serendipity. At a I'd gone to Stanford for my MBA, and one of my classmates there, Karthik, who's now my co-founder at Jumbotail, we just happened to sort of meet there. Hadn't met him for a while, and I was telling
Met
him,
him
here's what I'm doing, and
at Dharamshala, like while you were working
at the
with them.
wedding. No, this was a wedding in Delhi. I think this
Okay.
is December 2014.
Okay.
I said, I've been living this whole mountain man life for a while. Let me go and see what civilization looks like a little bit. So I went down to Delhi, and one of our classmates was getting married, and it's a small class at Stanford. I mean, we were
Yeah.
what 380 people in total, probably 10 or 12 people from India. So we knew each other well.
Right.
So I ended up meeting Karthik there and telling him, here's what I'm doing. And he had an interesting journey. He was a soldier. We went from Siachen to Silicon. He likes to tell his story from Kashmir Valley to Silicon Valley. He ended up at eBay and then Flipkart. And so we got talking about the role of e-commerce.
Yeah.
And it turned out that he'd tried something like this with coconut farmers in Madurai in 2008. So we got talking. One thing sort of that
Yeah.
conversation sparked a bunch of other conversations, and I think the fundamental realization was that if you really wanted to do something at scale to solve problems for not only farmers but everybody else in the ecosystem, starting on the supply side, working with farmers was probably not the right idea, or at least not an idea that had a meaningful chance, at least in our mind, of impacting hundreds of millions of people. I mean, get probably the fastest way of getting to tens of thousands of people, even hundreds of thousands of people. But if the scale of ambition in terms of creating impact was hundreds of millions of people, and today that scale is now 1 billion plus people in our
Right.
minds, then our view was that the only way to do that is going to be if you start by really aggregating demand at scale. And that led us to spend a lot of time thinking about how India's food and grocery ecosystem is structured, and that in a nutshell sort of led us to what we've been doing at Jumbotail for the last 7.5 years.
So walk us through how I mean, you spoke about a couple of problems, right? One is the logistics and actually getting goods from one end to the other. The other problem, that's a pretty big problem, is waste. And when you talk about fresh produce, only a fraction of it actually gets used. Uh, any more problem spaces that I'm missing? And how did you guys kind of zero in on what you're going to focus on?
Where do I get started as far as problems are concerned, right? I mean, I think this is a place where every single problem you could think of exists, and I think that, and therefore it was important to sort of not really. I mean, it's important to understand the problems the current ecosystem had,
Okay.
but at the same time also try and reimagine this with a complete blank slate, right? To say, okay,
Okay.
if I didn't necessarily have all of this, and let's say you're an alien and you land on this planet and you say, okay, I see and I observe a certain number of things, and you have this there's no sort of
Beginner's mindset, right?
investment in
Go back
there's
to the
no
beginning.
biases that you're operating with.
Yeah.
How would
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
build something, and how would you build something? I'm a big sports fan, and I watch a lot of sports. And when I was in the US, people used to have this analogy, or they used to talk about Wayne Gretzky, who was one of the greats in ice hockey, and they used to say
Yeah.
Wayne Gretzky was great because he skated not where the puck was, the the little ice hockey puck. He skated where the puck was going to be. And so I think the thing, and that was his talent. And if you look at pretty much any sport, right, be it football where you talk about Messi, or even cricket where you talk about the great batsmen, it's all about knowing where the ball is going to be, not necessarily being where the ball is currently. And so in our mind, we said, here's a few fundamental facts that we believe in,
Okay.
And then if those facts are going to play out, then what would you build, not in anticipation of those facts playing out. So one was, as a country, India is going to get richer, right? People are going to be time poorer, but will have money, will have disposable income. It's
And
a very
just to
young
set the
country.
context, this is what
Correct.
time frame? This is like
This is 2015, early 2015, right?
okay.
So once we started sort of saying, okay, we want to do something. We want to do something in the food and grocery space. We want to do something that impacts perhaps hundreds of millions of people, or if we get
Yeah,
lucky, a
big
billion
impact,
billion
right?
people.
Yeah,
And therefore, what are the problems that we want to solve for in the food and grocery ecosystem, right?
mm,
All the way from consumer folk, all the way back to farm or factory, depending on what product you're talking about. Let's take a view of that sector, and then it doesn't really matter where you start, but you have to have a point of view on around
yeah.
what that thing is going
Mm,
to look like over a
where
10,
it's gonna
15 year
go,
period.
right? So growth,
Exactly.
India growing was one, and yeah,
So India growing was one. Consumption growing was another one. We're a very young country. That means people, unlike our parents' generation, and I'm, sort of lumping you in my generation, even though that might not be true. But unlike our parents' generation, where limited choices. I think young people today, really want to express themselves in their own identities through the things that they consume, right? I mean, it's not just about who you say you are. What you consume is also indicative of who
yeah,
you are, and so.
very
I think we're as a country, I mean, we're a very brand starved country. And I think the hypothesis was, with this, increasing urbanization, increasing prosperity, increasing, requirement for brands. And then on the other side, I think it becoming a lot easier to manufacture, it becoming a lot easier to actually reach people. You don't
true.
have to do large TV ads anymore. Or you wouldn't
Yeah,
have to do when we thought about this in 2015. And again, I think the impending just, wave of the internet, right? I mean, I think we were, it was still 2G, 3G at that point in time, but we said, it's only a matter of time.
yeah,
And what does that really afford you in terms of solutions in this ecosystem? And again, starting on the demand side. And I think some things we said, okay, these are punts that we're going to take. We don't know for sure whether they will happen. We felt confident, but it was definitely not. When we were starting in 2015, nobody was really placing a bet on Kiranas being the linchpins of food and grocery for the foreseeable future. Right? This is the time when a lot of money was flowing into B2C internet. A lot of
yeah,
people were raising very large sums of capital to build B2C companies in this space, and everybody was pronouncing the impending decline or doom or death of the Kirana ecosystem. Hasn't played out that way, and I guess we got lucky in that sense that the bet that we took around that, and it was not really just like it wasn't a
it
mindless
wasn't a
bet, right? I
random
think
bet, right? It was like
it
there's
wasn't
a
a
lot of
random bet.
thought going into it, and you knew that this D2C thing was sort of it was buzz. I think there was
I
hype.
I
It
wouldn't
settled down, and
I wouldn't call it a buzz, yeah, Amazon. I think in my mind, we make one of the biggest mistakes we make as a when we look at our country is it's not a monolithic entity, right? I mean, there's a lot of Indias, and
right,
so the good news when you're building anything in this country is that there will be a market, and there will be a very large market. I mean, even B2C internet today, and will find a market. I mean, you'll build very large companies, you'll create a lot of value.
mm,
Will you create that necessarily for the largest number of people in this country? Perhaps not. But there will definitely be, there's a lot of smart people, trying to find solutions, and there will be a cohort of people that, for whom those solutions will be valuable. And that's the beauty of our country today, right? Which is that you don't have to pick one path and solve for only that. I mean, yes, if you choose to pick a path, you must pick one path. But there's a lot of ways in which a lot of problems need to be solved. A lot of problems can be solved. And so I wouldn't necessarily pronounce that as a fad. I mean, I think there's a lot of value being created, but
right,
at least our mindset was what path will give us a potential path to impacting a billion people. And to us, that was a path in food and grocery. That was a path in really centering around the kirana store and the kirana entrepreneur. Because our belief was that kiranas will continue to remain a very important part. They will have to evolve, obviously, both in terms of how they deal with consumers, how they serve their markets, but also how they interact with manufacturers. But we felt that was what we wanted to build. And one hypothesis around aggregating demand and then working our way backwards up towards sources of production was something that we very early on identified. I think there was a whiteboarding discussion that we had with Samir Brijvarma at Nexus, who was I don't know how he found that we were doing something. We didn't even have a company at that point in time, and again, like, we got very lucky, right? I mean, we had a seed check before we had a company. I don't I don't trivialize that advantage, and I think, but we drew out this. I remember Karthik, my co-founder, drew up this large map of this ecosystem, and our vision of what would happen over a 10, 15, 20 year period. we're still, for the most part, executing along that
Wow.
that plan. And some days we look back and say, okay, on some elements we're further along, and some elements I think we're still waiting for the world to change. But I think it's pretty heartening to be able to have this vision of what you wanted to build, and for large parts of it to slowly be coming true. It's a lot of work. It's been a lot of fun. It's not been always smooth sailing, but looking back, I mean, I wouldn't have done it any other way.
It's incredible. I mean, it brings me back to the analogy that you had of anticipating where the ball is going to go, and making sure that you're there, and walk us through maybe the next steps, right? So you had this vision,
Mhm.
you got your seed check. How did you build out your MVP, get a team together?
Yeah.
How did you get your first customer?
It's an interesting story. I mean, we so remember, this is middle of 2015. Karthik, my co-founder, was at Flipkart. We he had a 3-month notice period. He had
Okay.
and he just come off like big billion day, the first big billion day. And he had his daughter. This is I always feel like I feel like I took a risk, and a lot of people say you took a risk, and I honestly, in my mind, I mean, what did I really have to lose? We started the company when his daughter was a year old, was a month old, right?
A
And
month old. Okay.
month old, right? And I think it's Mother's Day today, and I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't sort of think about all the things that many of the men in this world are able to do. I mean, a lot of them are only possible because there are incredible women allowing us this opportunity, either as mothers or as co-workers or as partners to really live our lives in meaningful ways, and live our dreams, and often at times with great sacrifice. So I mean, happy Mother's Day to everyone. But I think looking back, we we were clear we wanted to work with Kiranas, right? We were also clear that we wanted to solve. I mean, if you really look at the life of a Kirana, right, there's two big problems, right? One is I
Okay.
have a limited number of consumers that can walk into my store, and
Okay.
so how do I maximize that? Because there's about a 300,
You just get
400,
foot
500
traffic,
meter
right? So
radius, right,
yeah.
around.
So
Exactly.
optimizing for the revenue per person that walks into your store.
Correct.
Got it.
Correct. Right. There's that. Right. So at some point you run out of new people that you can bring.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
nobody. I mean, I joke with. It sounds like a joke, but I can tell you. I mean, nobody understands the CAC to LTV logic better than a Kirana. I mean, they may not sort of talk about it in that way, but they will go to great lengths to retain customers. I mean, it's amazing. You walk into a Kirana store, you ask for
Never
something,
thought about that.
and you
Makes
know,
sense. That's why the service and giving people credit
yeah.
and doing all that.
Because if you know that you're not going to have like an infinite number of consumers to get, you do whatever it takes to actually provide whatever level of service that you can provide. I mean, there are people who, if you walk into a Kirana today and that person doesn't have that product, right, they know that the
You want this, and
person 10 feet down the road has that. And this is very different from literally any other part of the world, at least most parts of the developed world, which is once you go to a big box store, which is kind of your option in most parts of let's say the US. I mean, there's you've parked your car, you've gone there, there's an invested cost, you'll go around, you'll find a substitute, perhaps, all of that, right?
yeah,
But when you're walking into a Kirana, I mean, that okay, he doesn't have the product. I'm just going to go to the next guy 10 feet
that's
away.
right. Yeah.
And so, in stock, right, matters massively to Kiranas, right? They don't want consumers walking in and asking for something and having to, send them away. They will, in fact, sometimes go and buy from the next store at MRP, make a loss on that sale, but
And
they'll come
keep the
and
ticket.
get it to you
Yeah.
just to keep you as a customer. And I think that was one. There was a few realizations along the way that we had, but the idea was we definitely felt that if you really wanted to solve for Kirana's problems. One was obviously a problem: how do you get more consumers? How do you get more demand? And then the other problem was, Kiranas were spending, and are still in many parts of the country spending 60-70% of the time just making sure that their stores remain in stock, right? And if you sort of connect those two problems, what levers does the Kirana, at least at a basic level, have to retain consumers or get new consumers? It is to carry a more relevant assortment or a selection of products that consumers want in your area. It has to be hyper localized, right? And they have to be in stock. Those are two actually big reasons. I mean, you don't necessarily go in for pricing reasons to a Kirana, right?
Yeah.
But the convenience is worth it. And so we said, okay, let's try and solve the problem of keeping products in stock, because once you earn the trust of the retailer, then you can actually help them also solve problems on the consumer side. And so the first part of the this value chain that we started to solve for was, how can we help Kiranas source more effectively, and in that process, how can we help brands reach Kiranas more effectively, or manufacturers more generally, right? Because if you really look at a retailer, about 65% of a retailer's products are actually not branded per se. I mean, they're staples: wheat, rice, pulses, spices, things like that are you have to go to a mandi to buy, which is actually even more complicated to go, because you have to go like 30-40 kilometers, shut your shop down, buy a full, because you can't go there every day. You have to buy a lot of material, expose yourself to all the dangers of transportation along the way, block a lot of working capital, end up holding a lot of days of inventory, and therefore a selection further shrinks. And so we said, let's solve that problem.
So you're replacing the process of someone going to a mandi, picking up stuff and coming back, which is something that someone would do like once a week, or how often?
It's tough to do once a week. It's tough to do once a week. It's a once in 15 days or once in 30 days, because depends on how far you are and how much help.
This is the current state that you guys are looking at. Okay.
Correct. And again, right? I mean, having to go literally store by store. There's a guy who sells rice. There's a guy who sells pulses. There's a guy who sells. So it's a lot of a typical Kirana is dealing with 100 to 150 different suppliers. It's mind-boggling. I mean, I remember when we started out. I went out to a whole bunch of our neighborhood Kiranas and I got friendly with them, and I said, sir, why don't you give me your bills, right? And I went in and manually digitized all these bills. And I said, okay, let me just even try and understand, how many people are these people dealing with. And it was mind-boggling. I mean, it was like 150 different suppliers a month. Can you imagine? I mean, for a store, that's selling, 4.5, 5 lakh rupees, or $100,000 a year, right? I mean, you're talking about that person dealing with 150 suppliers. It's a very fragmented market, and that was also one of the things that attracted us to this, which was that we're a country where, unlike let's say the US, where farming is very, very concentrated, retail is fairly concentrated. In our country, I mean, there's 600 million farmers, tens of thousands of different manufacturers, 14 million Kiranas. There's not really much in terms of concentration, right? I mean, and so that's great for the internet. That's great for e-commerce, because you actually have a mechanism by which now fragmentation on both sides of the value chain is actually a great place to be building an e-commerce business. So we said, let's build a business which doesn't require a sales force in the first place. And this is, again, one of those antithetical things to, people said, oh, you're building, B2B. And I always tell people, right, we're building B to small b. The small b is the small business, which is very consumerish in the ways that it operates. And therefore, you can't take your typical sort of B2B SaaS type of, playbook to this.
When you think of it in terms of CAC and LTV as well, if you have a sales force, it becomes pretty hard to justify the acquisition costs. So,
yeah, I mean, we do have a small team of people. I think at this point, right, we serve nearly 300,000 retailers across 50 cities, across the country. We have 200 people that are onboarding people across these cities. But, after that onboarding happens, everything goes, digital, and everything is done through the app. So there's no sales force, no 100% of our orders actually come through the app. And this is something that's fairly unique. A lot of people, there's about 20, 30 companies across the world trying to do something similar. Nobody comes even close in terms of being able to get to 100%, in terms of, no salesperson walking into the store to take orders. But it actually does, as you rightly said, right, change your CAC to LTV dramatically. I mean, our CAC is 100 rupees. I mean, like, $1.50. And, lifetime retention over years and years, you get, from first order is 60, 70% with no real, sales force on the ground. But remember, this is 2015. This was 2G, 3G era, right? People had WhatsApp packs at that point.
How do you convince people to digitize their Kirana store? That must have been.
People thought we were crazy, and I think that we people told us so much that we were crazy that we sometimes started to sort of doubt ourselves. But we said, okay, let's do like a simple experiment, right? This is a time when people used to switch off data packs at night so that they wouldn't have there was this fear that usage will go up. And so I remember, I think it's September of 2015, Karthik and I, sitting at night around 10:30, we said, okay, let's by that time we'd had 5 or 6 retailers that we were talking to quite a bit and trying to understand what was going on in the space. And so we said, okay, let's put all these guys in a WhatsApp group. And the reason to put it in a WhatsApp group was, you could get these blue ticks, right? The 2 blue ticks, so you'd be able to see, right? What time was it delivered and what time did they read it? And we said, okay, hypothesis was they'll probably switch it off at night, and therefore, let's see what time it got delivered and what time it actually got read. So I think at 10:40 or so, we sent out this message. I looked back at it and had all these emojis and all of these things, and it was like, this is the rate of these following products, and tell us if you'd be interested in finding out more. And we sent this to this group of five customers, and I get,
waiting to see when they reply.
sorry.
You send this out at night, you're saying, waiting to see.
Yeah, it's at 10:40 p.m. Some middle of the night in September 2015.
Yeah.
And we said, okay, if we get like blue ticks, we know that there is a play here because people are at least reading their messages, right?
Okay.
And I get goosebumps when I think back about this, because at 10:43 we had 4 orders.
Oh my God.
Right, and I was like, wow, right? This is definitely not what we expected.
Yeah.
And so then next morning was like, okay, I got to go to the wholesale mandi to actually get what I told these guys I could give them.
Yeah.
So I went, I took Karthik's car, and in the boot of his Honda City at that time, we brought like these 10 boxes of oil back, and I took a bill, and I said, thank you for your service, and went and did these deliveries myself. And that's sort of where it got started. And I think you can't really plan these things, but I think once you see this traction, you got to sort of follow it, right? I mean, I think everybody told us start with FMCG brands are there, brands will want to do it.
Correct. No, we wouldn't have learned right? On the ground, and I think this is a great lesson for our listeners. We've heard this so many times. You need to talk to your users, right? Who are going to actually, like, people who are actually going to use your product. It's not the FMCG companies, for sure.
Correct. Oh, and I think the other point that you made, Mazin, right? Talk and listen at the same time. Yeah. I think oftentimes, right? I think I made this mistake a lot of times. You start with a preconceived notion of what the world should look like, and I mean, especially now, right? I mean, there's so much content out there about, go talk to your customers, speak to your customers, all of that. But I think I find a lot of people making this mistake, which is you go out with a preconceived notion. It's almost like, let me check the box of, have I spoken to 50 customers, right? But, it is speaking with and listening rather than, talking at. And I think that is something that we made a lot of mistakes on that one, right? But I think over a period of time, just sheer volume of customers and hearing them, and also just spending time looking at how they were operating. I mean, I think a lot of users will tell you things that they sometimes feel like they want you to hear, right? You've come here, you've asked a question. Yeah. Nobody wants to feel like nobody wants to tell you, hey, I'm not really thinking about this. I'm sort of operating out of instinct, right? Everybody wants to be like, oh, I have this, framework, and this is how I decide, etc., etc. Yeah. And so, as much as talking and listening to customers, I think it's important to also just see what they're doing, right? Because many times, what they do is completely opposite to what they say they do, right? I just give great example in this space, at least in our minds, is every single retailer in the country that I have ever spoken to, and I've spoken to now tens of thousands of them, right, will tell you primary decision-making factor is price.
Okay, but it's not,
right? That how do you decide? It's price. If sasta hai to main le lunga, right? That, and it seems obvious, and it confirms what we imagine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. So it's like, check the box. I've spoken to my retailer. Pricing is what it is. Let's go out and build the marketplace that provides pricing. And I think at least in our realization, it's not an insignificant lever, but it's definitely, in our opinion, not the only lever. And I think going back to the point I made about in stock, the fact that the retailer wants consumers to stick around and continue to spend more, I think we've realized that service is actually a convenience, reliability, trust. These are harder things to build for because they're harder things to convince people about. You have to experience that to actually do it, right? Especially when you're trying to do this without a sales force. Right. You can go to tell someone, pricing is easy, right? I mean, you see a price here, you can make a decision.
Right. Exactly.
Pretty obvious, right? Challenge is, keeping that up and building that out as a moat is tough in our opinion. I think sort of leads to this problem of, sort of nobody wins in that battle because there's always somebody who can price, lower than you just by burning a little bit more money than you can. And I don't think that's the foundation of building a a viable business. And so yeah, I think we said, okay, we got to build based on service level, reliability, trust, convenience. And so a lot of the decisions that we took were this no sales force, 100% on app. There were times when people would call us and they'd say, my internet pack is exhausted. Place an order, right? Take a phone order,
manually on the phone,
right? And we'd say, no, we'll I'll update. Give me your number. I'll actually buy you an internet pack, right? On the phone. You place the order. You can pay me when you get the delivery. But I'm not going to take an order on the phone. And sometimes it's about being really, really. I think looking back, I mean, why is Jumbotail the only platform in the world that's been able to get retailers to come and place orders repeatedly? And our frequencies are like 4 or 5x of anybody else in this ecosystem, right? There are retailers who place orders 31 days in a month, and that has also come from. And people ask us, what's the secret? And it's a little tough to actually tell people what the secret is, because there's no one secret, right? I think the biggest secret is we just didn't allow ourselves to build any other way of doing it, and so teams figured it out along the way, right? I think the biggest barrier oftentimes to building a business is your own belief that whether it can be done or not done, right? And I think you have to almost sometimes believe it before it's possible, because if I hadn't I think if we hadn't believed that it was possible, the easiest thing to have done, to have scaled faster, would have been to actually put a sales force on the ground, put a telecalling team. I mean, we're a 7.5-year-old company, right? I mean, we're the largest business in this ecosystem today if it comes to true e-commerce, but for the first 5.5 years, we were in one city.
Wow, 5.5 years in one city. So it was word of mouth growth and organic. Like, how were you guys thinking about getting the word out there without a sales force? And obviously, this is not the kind of sector where SEO works, right? You can't do Google ads. So, like, how do you actually get people to talk? First in one city, and then when you branched out, how did you kind of replicate that?
Yeah. So I think the reason to be in one city was, we realized very early on that there's gone a lot of, this is probably the largest market in this country if you think about it, right? I mean, $600-700 billion today. People talk of it being $1 trillion market. TAM's not a problem, right? Yeah. And it's a very fragmented market, so it's not even a winner take all business, right? I mean, I mentioned earlier, right? 150 different suppliers dealing with one retailer. So it'll come down over a period of time. I mean, and today, there are retailers where we get 25-30% of their share of wallet, which makes us by far the largest partner. But it's a journey, right? And in that journey, we realized that you had to be capital efficient, right? I mean, we've built now today the largest business in the ecosystem with about 5% of the capital of anybody else, or at least some of our larger competition, right? And that came from a belief that it couldn't be discounting, it couldn't be pricing led, it had to be service and convenience and reliability, right? Which means you had to build a supply chain, all those capabilities. We run warehousing, we run last mile logistics, and in this country, I mean, I think my realization has been that you have to do the hard work, right? I mean, if you really want to build moats, you have to do the hard work. A lot of gray hair on my head is a function of building today what is the largest most efficient supply chain for food and grocery in the country, right? We literally run a B2C like supply chain serving retailers. What I mean by that is you can literally order one unit. There's no minimum order quantity, but what we lose in terms of that scale at a single product level is something that we more than make up in density and frequency, and therefore the efficiency is actually higher. But I think the first 5.5 years was really about building that out, and then once we felt that we had something that could scale rapidly and effectively, I mean. There's still a need of people to actually go and talk to the store the first time and download the app.
It's an onboarding process, right? Where
correct.
Yeah.
But that's a 10-minute conversation. It costs you 70-80 rupees if you take the cost of the the person going and doing that. But after that, what we figured out over that 5.5-year journey was provide a great first experience that causes the retailer to order for the second time, the third time, and the fourth time. And what we realized is once you get 5 orders, they almost never drop off unless the store shuts down.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like you every delivery is it goes into your trust piggy bank. Every bad experience obviously takes a lot more out of that trust piggy bank, and so you have to have enough before you screw up. But we do nearly at this point, I mean, very soon later this year we'll do 1 million deliveries a month, right? And so even at small error rates, you will impact customers. But I think what we've realized is that the beauty of a high frequency business, and ours is definitely a high frequency business, Nearly anywhere between 65 and 80% of our sales actually come from retailers who order between 9 and 30 times a month. So, the beauty of a high frequency business is that when you do the right thing, your trust actually goes up exponentially. Obviously, the
And you
danger
actually
of a
see
high
the
quality,
impact of that, right? And I think
exactly,
it's fascinating.
but the
We
danger of
obviously
a
talking to
high
people.
frequency, exactly, exactly. The danger of a high frequency business, if you give people bad experiences, it also goes down exponentially quickly, and you're dead. But that's the way we chose to build it, and therefore in a year and a half, from year 5.5 to 7, we were able to scale from 1 city to 50 cities, and and you see the same metrics, in fact, playing out a lot better across cities. Smaller. Bangalore obviously is our largest city, but today, Bangalore is only about 30% of the overall business. It's profitable today, uh, and other cities are fast catching up. And I see much better metrics in those cities because choices that retailers have are even lower. Um,
So it's
and
5 years
that sort
kind
of
of build it out right, get everything to work, and then 1.5 years scale it. And
correct.
it's
And
incredible.
that's the same approach that we're actually taking with our second business, which is if you actually look at the B2B side of the business, right? I mean, what we do is we have the e-commerce marketplace. We have about 35,000 SKUs on one side across about 2,000 brands or manufacturers, 300,000 retailers approximately on that. And then we do supply chain logistics, solve for payment and credit. It's we're one of the early I guess people to sort of get into solving for fintech and payments
Okay.
for this ecosystem. Nearly, I mean, last year was 1,000+ crores of credit enabled, 99.8% repayment.
Mm.
So that's one part of our business, and
And it's
credit is obviously a meaningful portion. Fintech is a meaningful portion of the transactions that are happening, but there's obviously a lot of transactions that happen without credit as well. And if you actually look at at some point we realize, okay, now it's time to actually solve the second problem, or actually, if you look at in the minds of the retailer, number one problem,
mm,
which is how do I, as a retailer, get more consumers? How do I get more consumers to come to me more often, spend more of their share of wallet with me?
okay.
And that's where we're now building a business that we call J24. It's predicated. You think about it as a a modern convenience grocery store in a box, right? I mean, uh, if you're an entrepreneur, whether you have experience with running a convenience retail store before or not, you can come to Jumbotail and say, I want to do this, and we'll give you pretty much all the resources that you need to be able to set up a modern convenience grocery store.
So that's all the
And that's
tech
under
resources like the website and all of that, and or physical
so
resources. What are we talking about?
if you absolutely completely everything, right? So if you look at what it takes to start a store, right? First is pick the right location. I mean, this is one thing in retail. Everybody says location, and
Yes,
location is
exactly.
very critical, right? If you're not in
Mm.
a place where there is traffic, and we've built a lot of interesting technology around even using image processing to figure out how much traffic is there, what happens, is this a place where you'll put a camera and understand what's happening, is this a good place for you to actually first set up a store.
Mm.
um,
Okay.
we also obviously the B2B business gives us a very good understanding of where what's being ordered in which store, which area orders what type of product, etc. So we have a more holistic view of what products and demand work. But starting from where to set up the store, what products to keep, uh, it's a 400-500 square foot store, but we're able to, because we service literally every day through our supply chain, you're able to actually reduce the number of inventory days that you have to hold and increase the in stock, and therefore
Mm.
these stores can carry anywhere between 1,200 to 1,500 SKUs of products, which are hyper targeted, right, to that 1 square kilometer area around you. And
Yeah.
so you get, when you, as a consumer, when you walk in, you're like, oh wow, these guys know exactly what I need to have. And
Yeah.
if they don't, for that matter, you can tell them. And then, because Jumbotail, the marketplace, has let's say in a city like Bangalore, maybe 12 to 15,000
You
SKUs,
can
there's a
explore this
good
one.
chance that they'll be able to order it and get it next time. So you walk in and you want something that you really really like, and it's not available in the store. You can say, hey sir, come back tomorrow, I'll get it for you.
I'll make sure
And
that's there
because
for you, and
and
you
they
can come.
right. And
Wow.
then loyalty solutions, you get loyalty points for walking in, and transacting. There's an app that allows you to discover. There's an app that allows you to pay later. If you really think about, you know I believe that this is what the future of convenience retail in large parts of the world, at least parts of the world that have a
Developing
Kirana
world.
like ecosystem
Yeah.
will look like, right? And India is going to be at the vanguard of making that happen. I think you're based in a city where 7-Eleven and Family Mart and all these places have great very interesting things there. And I think India will be one of the places over the next 10 years which will really lead the charge in transforming how retail operates. And I think in that, taking
We've
the
seen
best
some
that
of this
go
already.
ahead.
I think it's fascinating. Like we've seen a couple of companies in Indonesia come up that are copying Indian models, and we
Correct.
focus on these founders as well. And
India is going to be the fountain of, I think, a lot of innovation that will then get that will serve to inspire people across the world. I think Southeast Asia,
yeah,
large parts of Africa, large parts of Latin America, a lot of context is similar.
so, yeah,
And I think our belief is that over the next 5-10 years, a model where the entrepreneur continues to run the store, but is really empowered by a series of solutions, right, which they could be on planogramming, how to run promotions, how to bring consumers in, how to create digital relationships with consumers, how to create sort of omni-channel relationships with
yeah,
with consumers. And so the power of, we call them giants, right? The entrepreneurs that are part of the J24 network are called giants. Giants empowered by the solutions that we provide. Some version of that is, I think, what a large number of consumer convenience grocery stores, neighborhood grocery stores are going to actually have. And they take the best of both worlds, right? Which is the deep personal relationships, the sense of community that they bring, the incredible hard work that they do, the incredible cost structures at which they're able to operate, and then on top of that, really being able to sort of build meaningful relationships with their consumers, not having to worry about how to get stock, new solutions in terms of what products to carry, access to fruits and vegetables as a set of products which most retailers otherwise don't carry because it's really complicated. That, I believe, is what the future of a lot of retail, at least in urban India, is going to look like, and perhaps large parts of the world as well. And that's, therefore, we're very excited about that part of the business now. And that would
indeed.
only have been possible, I think, because it rides on top of this much larger, obviously, B2B business, which is highly efficient and scalable.
It's amazing. And talking about the future, I mean, it's now quite an exciting space. It wasn't when you joined in 2015. And one of the initiatives I wanted to ask you about was ONDC. I mean, you've worked with Nandan Nilekani himself, and so have you guys participated in ONDC? Do you think that that'll play a huge role in the future and how do you see it shaping up?
Yeah, I think as a country, we're really, India is really leading the world in terms of large digital public infrastructure, and I think that's a great thing. I mean, I think it will create immense prosperity, the entire India stack, right? I think with ONDC, I think anything that is a driver of digital adoption, be it through consumers, be it through retailers, be it for brands, is generally a good thing for this country, right? I think that it will move us forward much faster than any other way that people would have chosen. And the fact that the government is putting its full weight behind it is an incredible thing. I think there's significant differences between how, let's say, ONDC would have to solve for problems versus, say, how UPI did it in the past. It is a commerce, especially in our category, is a little is a multi-dimensional problem. I think solving for some of those things will take time. But when it does, I think it'll be pretty transformational. I think when I look at digital adoption, I think a lot of us immediately jump to people will place orders online and delivery will happen, right? I think that's a very narrow view of how digital can really change the face of commerce in food and grocery. I think there's fundamental things to be solved in India, right? I mean, and this applies as much to quick commerce or B2C internet e-commerce as well. Between maximum retail price, which is a construct in India which doesn't allow you to price above a certain level, between the fact that the more convenient you make something, that the more you push people towards smaller and smaller ticket sizes, between the fact that it is going to become in all likelihood more and more expensive to deliver, because if you, until such time that drone delivery or teleportation comes in, it's likely that salaries in India and working class
Yeah.
salaries will go up, right?
Yeah.
And so uh, a model which is entirely predicated on just delivery of small ticket, relatively low value items. I mean, just to give you a sense, right? I mean, an iPhone has the same form factor as a masala packet or a packet of biscuits.
Right.
A
Being
packet of
made
biscuits that has the same form factor as an iPhone, which costs 1 lakh rupees, is 5 rupees, right? And but the cost of delivery is exactly the same. And so there will be high density pockets where that will happen. There will be certain ticket sizes at which it will happen. There will be places where people will be willing to pay delivery fees where that will happen. But I think we would do ourselves a big disservice as a country if we only think about digital and the internet and as being only applicable where home delivery happens or digital commerce happens. I mean, let me give you an example, right? I mean, even today, there are many kiranas where 20-30% of their sales actually come from somebody calling them and saying, bhaiya, I'm calling from the house nearby, send this to me, right? And we don't call it e-commerce, right? But if you now put a Alexa or a Google system that sort of you talk into it and that gets transition, or that message goes to the kirana and they deliver, suddenly it becomes e-commerce. But effectively, I mean, nothing really changed, right? And so there will be but I think the future, and ONDC is a very large, and it's great because it sort of is this rallying cry, and I've seen this journey with Aadhaar before, and I've seen this journey with now UPI as well.
Yeah.
It will push people to actively consider this much faster than they would have otherwise done it. And so
Right.
a truly omni-channel digitally enabled future, which is an inevitability in my mind, will only happen faster because more people and more smart people and more capital will find its way towards doing this. And I'm not to say that capital is the only way to solve it, but I think just the attention of very smart people with this view that when you realize something's inevitable, oftentimes a lot of blinders come off, and I think it frees people up to think with a little bit more imagination and creativity to solve problems. And I think that's it's never been a better time to be building a business like ours or many other businesses in this country. And I'm very fortunate to be living in this time and having the opportunity to participate in that journey.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. So before we wrap up, I want to ask you one question that we
Yes.
ask all our guests. It's why we call this show Founders Unfiltered. What is some unfiltered feedback that you've received from someone that's really impacted you personally or professionally?
Give me a minute to think about it.
Yes, of course.
And you want to also ask me. Now that we're recording this, you want to ask me
Yes, yes.
what the other
We'll
one is. The
we'll add that in. Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll do the unfiltered one and then we'll come back when we mark it. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a tough one, man. Let me give me 10 seconds to think about it.
Yeah. Take your time. Take your time. No worries.
I think this was in terms of an unfiltered advice. I mean, I think this was about a year in, to my, to my entrepreneurial journey, and when you're building a business that has a lot of moving parts, right? I mean, there's supply chain, there's e-commerce, there's credit, there's a lot of things that break, right? And I think that if I look back at my career up until then, consulting sort of is this, you've got to get everything right, and it has to be perfect, and it has to be, all the I's must be dotted and the T's must be crossed. And I think, a friend of mine who again, runs a very large e-commerce business. At one point, he told me, we were just talking, and I was sort of ranting about, this is not working, this is not working. Why is this, why is it so difficult to do? And he said, things are going to break. And, if the easiest way to kill your business, which you are in the process of doing, if you continue to do this, is to try and go around with a, fire extinguisher, trying to put down
Put
every
all
fire
fires.
that is there. Right. And he said, don't do that. I mean, you're going to kill your business, and you're going to stifle any creativity or any, risk-taking ability that your teams have if everything has to be perfect the first time. and you will miss the forest for the trees. You will miss the biggest fire. You will get this dopamine hit of having solved a little bit of a
Putting out more
problem
fire.
every time, every
Yeah.
time. But there'll be a fire burning that you will miss because of that, and it will kill your business, and you're doing that right now. And again, looking back, I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? And it's very tough. I still don't. I mean, I will not. I'll not claim that I can always do it. I mean, I am very, very obsessive about the small details, and it's important. I mean, looking back, I think you can't not be.
Yeah.
But I think learning how to let some fires burn, but making sure that they are the right fires burning and not the wrong fires burning is
And
is
that's the key, right?
is
Which fires do
absolutely
you
key.
let burn? And
Exactly. And sometimes you get it wrong and you get singed, and you got to be constantly watching out for that. But I think that was really, I mean, the imagery of that was very powerful. Am I able to implement it? Sadly, no, all the time. I don't think I'm able to do it, and there is a certain obsessiveness that one also must have, and so it's a balancing act. But I think if he hadn't told me that, I would have either burnt out long time ago, or just been more insufferable than I probably already am. Neither of which would have been great for the business, and so I really, really appreciate that advice.
Ashish, what's one truth that very few people would agree with you on?
So I think that especially when one has a little bit of quote unquote success in life, right? You have a few fancy names on your resume. Companies raised a little bit of money. You have customers that like you. You get to come on podcasts like this. Uh, there's a tendency that we try and sort of attribute a lot more of our success to a plan, and a very focused execution as per a plan. And I'm a big believer that honestly, serendipity and luck are such an important part of all of this, that uh, you know sometimes we take ourselves a little bit too seriously, and you buy into this self image of I made it happen. And I think a lot of time, and that's the day when you're really screwed, because I think a large part of literally every major turn in my life. I mean, how I met Karthik at this wedding, this chance meeting, that led me to do this project with the public distribution system for 3 years,
Mhm.
right? Literally every decision in my life that has been consequential looking back, and probably has led me to this path or to this point, has been a serendipitous one, right? And so um, I think being open to that, not sort of being so sure of yourself that you get in your own way. I think being putting yourself in a variety of different situations, and really not really having a point of view on why is this going to be meaningful or helpful in the short term, right? I think it makes life more interesting. It allows you to. I have this motto in life I mentioned to earlier as well, right? Which is is this going to be an interesting story someday? And if it has a chance of being an interesting story, whether or not it makes sense in the current scheme of things, uh, life is much more fun when that happens. And great coincidences have often led to incredible things. And it also allows you to actually sort of look at various different domains. And I think if you look at some of the biggest innovations in life or society, they've all come from people who took a very different view of an established business.
Mhm.
And so if you want to sort of try and emulate that path, following more of a Brownian motion path is probably in my mind, at least, that's made life a lot more fun and interesting. And it's worked out reasonably okay so far, so I'm going to continue to do that.
No, that's amazing. I think it's putting yourself in the right place to get lucky. Um,
And not necessarily not necessarily doing it in a very purposeful manner, right? I think a lot of times, right, right now with all this content out there, people talk about, oh, you got to go to these meetings, you got to go and network, and no, man, I mean, no, because that's
just do
not the
things for
beaten
the
path.
sake of it.
That's not serendipitous then, right? Because
Yeah.
everybody's doing it. And so do shit that nobody else is doing, right? And don't worry about what other people are going to say, and don't worry about is this going to let me get a new better job, or is this going to get me a network. I mean, if everybody is thinking that way, then the chances of you getting a disproportionate return or a different outcome is probably lower if you do the same thing as everybody else does.
You're going to be like everybody else, of course.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ashish. It's really been a pleasure hearing about your journey. I've learned so much. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Mazin and Aviral, for the opportunity to share my story, and hopefully, it's I really enjoyed this, and so really appreciate you giving me the opportunity.